Imagine a man so desperate, so driven by faith, that he made a vow to God that might have cost him his only daughter's life. A man rejected by his family, shamed by his birth, forgotten by his people, yet called a hero of faith in the Bible. How does someone like that go from outcast to legend? This is the story of Jephthah, a judge whose life is a gut-wrenching mix of courage, tragedy, and mystery. Was he a hero who trusted God against all odds, or a well-meaning father who made a devastating mistake? By the end, you'll decide for yourself. Born in shame. Jephthah's story begins in a place of pain. The Bible introduces him in Judges 11:1 with a line that hits like a punch. Jephthah the Gileadite was a mighty man of valor, but he was the son of a harlot. In ancient Israel, that label wasn't just gossip, it was a life sentence. To be the son of a harlot meant rejection, shame, a permanent mark that screamed, "You don't belong." Imagine growing up knowing your own family despised you. Jephthah's brothers, the legitimate sons of Gilead, didn't just mock him, they threw him out. Judges 11:2-3 tells us they said, "You'll get nothing from our father's house. You're the son of another woman." Picture the scene, a young man cast out, humiliated, told he's worthless by the people who should have loved him. But here's where it gets wild. Jephthah didn't break. He fled to a place called Tob, and there he became a leader, not of the elite but of the outcasts. The Bible calls them vain men, misfits, rejects, people society had no use for. Jephthah, the shamed son, became their captain. Isn't that incredible? God was already shaping him, turning his rejection into purpose, preparing him for something bigger than he could have imagined. The call of the outcast fast forward, and Israel's in trouble. The Ammonites are closing in, ready to crush Gilead. The same people who rejected Jephthah, his brothers, the elders, the ones who slammed the door in his face, are now desperate. They need a leader, and guess who they turn to? The outcast, the son of shame. Why? Because despite everything, Jephthah was a mighty man of valor. His courage, his skill, his grit, it was unmatched. Isn't it strange how God picks the unlikely ones? The ones the world writes off are often the ones he calls to change history. They come to Jephthah, hats in hand, begging him to lead. And Jephthah, he doesn't gloat, he doesn't turn them away. He steps up, proving that God doesn't choose based on your past or your pedigree. He chooses based on your heart. But this moment of triumph is just the setup for the tragedy that's about to unfold. The vow that changed everything. Here's where the story takes a dark turn. Jephthah's now the commander, facing a brutal war against the Ammonites. He's ready to fight, but he wants God's assurance. So he makes a vow so reckless, so dangerous, it still haunts us today. Judges 11:30-31 records it. "If you give me victory over the Ammonites, whatever comes out of my house to meet me when I return in peace will belong to the Lord, and I will offer it as a burnt offering." Stop and feel the weight of those words. This wasn't a casual promise. It was a desperate, all-in plea from a man who believed God could deliver, but didn't fully understand what he was saying. A burnt offering? In ancient Israel, that meant sacrifice. Complete, irreversible surrender to God. But here is the chilling part. Jephthah's vow didn't specify what would come out of his house. An animal? A servant? He didn't know. And in his time, surrounded by pagan nations like the Moabites and Ammonites who practiced human sacrifice, Jephthah's words carried a shadow of cultural ignorance. Why would he say this? Was it faith? Desperation? A mix of both? The Bible doesn't sugarcoat it. It shows us a man of courage, but also a man shaped by his world, making a vow that would shatter his life. And God? He stays silent. No voice from heaven, no angel to stop him. That silence is deafening. Have you ever felt God's silence in your own moments of desperation? Sometimes it's the loudest warning he gives. The heartbreaking return. Jephthah goes to war, and God delivers. The Ammonites are defeated, and Jephthah returns home a hero. You can picture the scene, the air filled with celebration, music, the joy of victory, but then everything stops. Judges 11:34 paints the moment. When Jephthah returned to his home in Mizpah, who should come out to meet him but his daughter? dancing to the sound of timbrels. She was his only child. Besides her, he had neither son nor daughter. His only daughter, his only child, dancing, celebrating, full of love and life. And in that moment, Jephthah's world collapses. The vow he made in the heat of battle now stares him in the face. She's the one who came out to meet him. She's the one he vowed to offer. Can you imagine the pain? The Bible says he tore his clothes, a raw, gut-wrenching act of grief, and cried, "Oh, my daughter, you have brought me to my knees, you are my trouble." But notice something. Jephthah doesn't blame God. He doesn't back out. He says, "I made a vow to the Lord and I cannot break it." His heart is breaking, but his commitment to God holds. And then comes the part that hits even harder, his daughter's response. A daughter's courage. This young woman, whose name the Bible doesn't even record, doesn't scream or run. She doesn't curse her father or God. Instead, she says, "Father, if you've made a vow to the Lord, do to me as you promised." All she asks for is 2 months to go to the mountains with her friends, to mourn the fact that she'll never marry, never have children. Then she returns, ready to face whatever her father's vow demands. Her courage is staggering. Her submission is heartbreaking. In a world where women had little power, she steps into this moment with a strength that echoes through history. Was she honoring her father's faith? Was she trusting God in her own way? We don't know, but her willingness to face the vow head-on makes her a silent hero in this tragedy. The mystery of the vow. Now we come to the question that's haunted scholars, theologians, and readers for centuries. What happened to Jephthah's daughter? Did he sacrifice her life, or did he dedicate her to God in another way? The Bible doesn't give us a clear answer, and that ambiguity is what makes this story so powerful. Let's break it down. Judges 11:39 says, "At the end of 2 months she returned to her father, who did with her according to his vow, and she knew no man." On one hand, the phrase burnt offering in Jephthah's vow suggests a literal sacrifice. In his culture, influenced by pagan practices, he might have believed this was the ultimate act of devotion. The text doesn't mention an altar or fire, but it also doesn't say God stopped him, as he did with Abraham and Isaac. This view paints Jephthah as a man of faith who tragically misunderstood God's heart, which never demanded human sacrifice. But there's another perspective. Some scholars argue Jephthah didn't kill his daughter, but dedicated her to a life of service to God, like a Nazirite, living in perpetual virginity. Why? The text emphasizes that she knew no man, and the daughters of Israel mourned her virginity, not her death, every year for 4 days. Judges 11:40. In Hebrew, the wording of Jephthah's vow can be read as 2 possibilities. An animal would be a burnt offering, but a person would be consecrated to God. This would mean his daughter lived, serving in the tabernacle, never marrying, never having a family, a sacrifice of a different kind. Which is true, we don't know. The Bible leaves it unresolved, and maybe that's the point. God's silence in this story isn't approval, it's a mirror, forcing us to wrestle with the complexity of faith, the danger of zeal without wisdom, and the cost of vows made in desperation. A hero of faith? Here's where the story takes its most shocking turn. If Jephthah's vow was a mistake, if it led to tragedy, how does he end up in Hebrews 11 listed among the heroes of faith? Hebrews 11:32 names him alongside giants like David and Samuel, men who trusted God through impossible odds. How can a man tied to such a dark moment be called a hero? The answer is profound. Hebrews 11 isn't about perfection. It's about faith, raw, messy, real faith. Jephthah wasn't honored for his vow or its outcome. He was honored for trusting God in the face of an unwinnable battle. He didn't rely on his sword or his reputation as a warrior. He turned to God, believing victory was possible only if God delivered. That's faith, even when it's flawed, even when it's mixed with ignorance. Think about it. Jephthah was the least likely candidate. Born in shame, rejected by his family, leading a band of outcasts, yet God chose him. His story screams a truth we often forget. God doesn't need you to be perfect. He doesn't need you to have it all together. He sees your heart, your trust, your willingness to step into the impossible. Jephthah's life shows us that faith can shine through brokenness, even when it leads to mistakes. What Jephthah teaches us. So what does this mean for us? Jephthah's story is a warning and a hope. It warns us about the danger of reckless promises, of acting out of desperation without seeking God's wisdom. It reminds us that faith without knowledge can lead to pain, but it also offers hope. God can use anyone, no matter how broken their past, no matter how deep their shame. Have you ever felt like Jephthah? Like the world's written you off, like your mistakes define you? Jephthah's life says you're not done. God sees the courage beneath your scars, the faith beneath your failures. He can take your rejection and turn it into purpose, just like he did for Jephthah. And what about his daughter? Her story is a quiet fire. She faced an impossible moment with grace and strength, trusting in something bigger than herself. She reminds us that even in tragedy there's dignity, honor, and a legacy that lives on. The daughters of Israel mourned her for generations, not just for her loss, but for her courage. The silence that speaks. The mystery of Jephthah's vow lingers because it's meant to. God's silence in this story isn't indifference. It's an invitation to wrestle, to question, to seek him deeper. Did Jephthah sacrifice his daughter, or did he dedicate her to a life of service? We may never know. But what we do know is this: faith is messy. It's not a straight line. It's a journey through pain, mistakes, and redemption. Jephthah wasn't a perfect hero. He was a man who loved God, trusted him, and stumbled in his zeal. Yet God called him faithful. That's the beauty of this story. It tells us that God doesn't discard the broken. He doesn't reject the flawed. He takes the outcasts, the shamed, the unlikely, and writes their names among his heroes. So what do you think? Was Jephthah a hero of faith or a well-meaning killer? His story doesn't give easy answers, but it does give hope. If God could use Jephthah, he can use you. Your past doesn't disqualify you. Your mistakes don't define you. Your faith, however imperfect, is what God sees. If this story stirred something in you, don't let it end here. Share it with someone who needs to hear that their brokenness isn't the end of their story. Dig deeper into God's word, because there's so much more to uncover. You're not an outcast. You're chosen. And like Jephthah, your faith can change everything.